It was late at night and the big theater was almost empty. Rows of red velvet seats stretched out into the darkness, and the only sound was the soft squeak of a mop moving across the stage. A man worked quietly, his movements slow and careful, like he had done this hundreds of times before. His uniform was worn and his hands were rough from years of work. But there was a strange gentleness in the way he touched things, especially when his eyes moved toward the grand piano sitting at the center of the stage. Every night, after everyone had gone home, he was the one who stayed behind to make the place shine again. He picked up the programs people dropped, wiped the dusty stage lights, and polished the piano until it gleamed under the faint glow of the exit signs. Nobody ever noticed him, but that didn't bother him much. He wasn't there for attention. He just wanted to earn enough to take care of his little girl waiting for him at home. His small apartment was only a short bus ride away. When he finished his shift, he would walk down the quiet street, still smelling faintly of wood polish and stage dust. The building he lived in was old, the kind where you could hear other families through the walls, but inside his small room, everything felt warm. His daughter always waited up for him no matter how late it was. Some nights she would pretend to be asleep, just so she could surprise him when he came through the door. "Daddy, you're home," she'd whisper, running to hug his legs. He would smile, even when he was too tired to speak, and pick her up in his arms. They didn't have much, just a second-hand sofa, a few pictures on the wall, and a small keyboard in the corner. That old keyboard was her favorite thing. She liked pressing the keys, even though half of them didn't work. Sometimes she would beg him to play something, and though he always said, "Not tonight," she knew he would give in eventually. When he played, everything around them changed. The music was soft, simple, and full of heart. It was the kind of sound that made even their tiny room feel like a dream. His daughter would sit beside him, eyes wide as if watching something magical. But when the song ended, the man's face always went quiet again. He'd close the keyboard, kiss her goodnight, and whisper, "It's late, sweetheart. Get some sleep." He never told her the full story of why he stopped playing years ago. She was too young to understand that once, her father had been a student at a music academy. Back then, music had been his whole world. He had spent every hour practicing, believing that one day he would stand on a real stage, not to clean it, but to perform on it. But dreams don't always survive life's storms. When his wife got sick, everything changed. The medical bills came first, then the late rent, then the impossible choice: keep playing or find a job to survive. He chose work. Music could wait, he thought. But when she passed away and he was left alone with a baby in his arms, he realized music wasn't something that waited. It slipped away quietly, like the sound of the last note fading into the dark. Still, every night in the theater as he cleaned, he felt it again. The pull of the piano, the faint echo of what used to be. Sometimes he would sit down when nobody was around, touch the keys gently and play just a few notes before reminding himself that it wasn't his place anymore. That piano belonged to others now, to the talented, the lucky, the ones who still had time to chase dreams. The staff at the theater didn't know much about him. To them, he was just the quiet custodian who never complained, never asked for extra pay, and never missed a day of work. Some joked about how serious he looked when he cleaned the piano. You'd think it was his. One of them laughed once, and he just smiled softly and kept wiping. He didn't mind what people thought. He had learned long ago that silence was easier than explaining everything you've lost. One evening, a local music competition was being set up in the theater. The place buzzed with excitement. Young musicians carried their instruments in and out. Sound technicians tested microphones, and judges reviewed their papers. The man was told to finish cleaning early that day, but he didn't mind staying a little longer to watch. As he worked quietly in the background, he couldn't help noticing how different each performer was. Some confident, some nervous, some smiling with hope. He remembered that feeling. When he got home that night, his daughter ran to him holding a small poster she found on the street. It was for the same competition. "Daddy, look! They're giving prizes for piano players," she said with shining eyes. "You should try." He laughed softly and shook his head. "That's for real musicians, sweetheart. I just clean the stage now." "But you are a real musician," she said, stubborn but innocent. "You play better than anyone." He didn't argue. He just smiled and changed the subject. But after she went to sleep, he sat by the window for a long time, staring at the poster. Somewhere deep inside, something stirred. A quiet ache, a whisper of what used to be. He folded the paper carefully and put it in a drawer. telling himself it didn't mean anything. Yet that night before bed he dreamed of music again. Days passed and the competition day arrived. He had a long shift ahead, cleaning up after rehearsals and setting up chairs. The contestants were already arriving when he entered the theater. He worked as usual, sweeping floors, polishing railings, and fixing cables. Every now and then he glanced at the stage. The piano sat there, shining under the lights. He caught himself wondering what it would feel like to sit there again, to feel the keys under his fingers, to hear that first note fill the hall. By evening, the rehearsals had started. The man stayed in the corner, quietly cleaning as the performers practiced. Some played beautifully, their fingers moving fast and sure. Others stumbled, nervous and unsure. Each piece brought back a memory, a moment from his past life. But he kept his head down, pretending not to listen too closely. When the last performer finished, the judges began discussing something among themselves. The sound technician complained that the piano seemed off tune, so they decided to test it. "We just need someone to play a few notes," one of them said, looking around. "Anyone here know how to play?" No one answered. Then one of the stage assistants pointed to the man sweeping near the curtain. "Hey, what about him?" she said jokingly. "He's always staring at that piano like it's his girlfriend." Everyone laughed. The man froze, embarrassed. "Come on," another worker teased. "Let's see if the janitor can play something." He smiled awkwardly and shook his head. "I just clean," he said quietly, but the technician waved him over. "Just a few keys," the man insisted. "We need to check the sound balance. It won't take a minute." The theater was almost empty by then, except for a few staff members and two judges still packing up their notes. Slowly he put down his mop and walked toward the piano. He hesitated before sitting down, feeling everyone's eyes on him. The laughter had stopped, replaced by curiosity. He took a deep breath. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the keys. They felt the same as they always had, cool, smooth, and alive. He pressed one gently. The note rang out clear and perfect. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he played another, and another. Something inside him woke up, something that had been asleep for years. His hands moved on their own as if they remembered what his heart had tried to forget. The simple test turned into a melody, quiet and full of emotion. Each note told a story, of loss, love, and time that had passed too quickly. The few people left in the hall stopped moving. The sound echoed softly through the empty seats, carrying warmth and sadness together. It wasn't just music, it was truth. When he finally lifted his fingers, the room was silent. Nobody said a word. He quickly stood up, embarrassed, and muttered, "Sorry, just testing." He grabbed his mop and went back to work, pretending nothing had happened. But the silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It was heavy, full of something unspoken. One of the judges turned to the others and whispered, "Who is he?" No one answered. Outside, as he locked up the theater and stepped into the cool night air, the man looked up at the stars. For the first time in a long while, he felt a small spark of hope flicker inside him. Maybe music hadn't left him after all. Maybe it had just been waiting for the right moment to return. He smiled to himself, walking home under the streetlights, unaware that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than he could imagine. The next morning, the man woke up earlier than usual. The sound of birds outside mixed with the faint noise of traffic. Sunlight peeked through the thin curtains of their small apartment. He sat at the edge of the bed, still thinking about what happened the night before. He could still feel the smooth piano keys under his fingertips, still hear the echoes of the melody in his mind. It had been years since he played like that, years since he allowed himself to. His daughter stirred and opened her sleepy eyes. "You're up already?" she asked, rubbing her face. He smiled softly. "Couldn't sleep much," he said. She looked at him curiously. "Did something happen?" He hesitated, then said, "Nothing, sweetheart. Just thinking." She climbed onto his lap, resting her head against his chest. "Are you still thinking about the competition?" He was surprised she remembered. He chuckled quietly. "You have a sharp memory for someone so small." "I think you should join," she said with a serious tone. "You were born to play." He looked at her, his heart heavy and warm at the same time. "Some dreams aren't for people like me anymore," he said gently. "But maybe they still are," she whispered, as if she didn't want to break the fragile morning silence. He didn't answer. He just held her close, listening to her heartbeat. When he arrived at work later that day, things felt a little different. People greeted him in a way they hadn't before. A few smiled at him. Others whispered to each other when he passed by. He wasn't sure if he was imagining it, until one of the stage crew members stopped him near the equipment room. "Hey," the man said, grinning. "That was some playing last night. Didn't know we had a musician hiding in the cleaning staff." He laughed awkwardly, trying to brush it off. "It was nothing. Just testing the piano. Nothing." The crewman shook his head. "You had people crying in the audience, man." "That wasn't nothing." The man didn't know what to say. He just smiled politely and went back to work. But inside, he could feel the walls he had built around himself slowly starting to shake. Later that afternoon, one of the event coordinators called him over. She was a kind woman who had always treated him with respect, but she had never really paid much attention to him beyond small talk. This time, though, her tone was different. "Hey, I wanted to ask," she began. "Was that really you playing yesterday?" He nodded, embarrassed. "Yes, ma'am. Just for a bit. I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "Disturb?" she said, almost laughing. "You inspired everyone. People are still talking about it. The judges were asking who you were." He blinked, unsure how to respond. She continued. "They said it was one of the most emotional performances they've heard. And they want you to come back tonight. The piano tuner's visiting again, and they'd like you to play something while they record the sound levels properly. Would you mind doing that?" He felt his chest tighten. Part of him wanted to say no, to stay invisible, to not make a fool of himself. But another part, deeper and braver, wanted to sit at that piano again just once more. "All right," he said softly. "I'll do it." The rest of the day moved slower than usual. He couldn't stop thinking about what he would play. Every time he passed the stage, he looked at the piano and felt that same pull in his heart. The same one he had felt years ago, before everything fell apart. When evening came, he stayed after his shift ended. The theater was quiet again, the audience seats empty. Only a few people were there. The sound technician, the coordinator, and a couple of musicians packing up their instruments. "Ready?" the technician asked. He nodded, though he didn't feel ready at all. He sat down, placed his fingers on the keys, and let out a slow breath. Then he began to play. This time he didn't hold back. He played the piece he had written years ago for his wife when they were both young. It was gentle, filled with love and hope, and the sound of it carried through the hall like a memory reborn. The technician forgot to take notes. The coordinator stood silently, her eyes glistening. Even the few people in the back stopped moving, afraid to interrupt something so pure. When he finished, he lowered his hand slowly, like saying goodbye to an old friend. The hall was completely silent for a few seconds before the coordinator said softly, "That was beautiful." He looked down, not knowing how to handle praise. "It's just something I used to play," he said. She smiled. "You should be on that stage, not cleaning it." He chuckled quietly. "That stage is for others now." But she shook her head. "Maybe not. You never know who's watching." He didn't realize then how true her words were. 2 days later, while he was fixing the chairs in the back row, one of the younger staff members ran up to him waving her phone. "Hey, you're famous," she said excitedly. He frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Someone recorded you playing the other night. It's all over the internet, look." She showed him a short video. It was him, sitting at the piano lost in the music. The caption read, "The janitor pianist who silenced the room." The video had thousands of views, and people were leaving comments like, "This man plays with his soul, and you can feel every note." He didn't know whether to laugh or panic. He wasn't used to being seen. For years he had lived in the shadows, content to be invisible. Now suddenly people were recognizing him. Some came up to him at work asking about his music. Others offered to record him properly. Even the theater manager called him into the office to talk. The manager was a strict man, rarely smiling, but that day he looked thoughtful. "I've been watching that video," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You've got something special. You ever think of performing again?" The man hesitated. "That was a long time ago. I don't think anyone wants to see someone like me on stage." The manager crossed his arms. "You're wrong. People want real stories. Real heart. You've got that. There's a charity concert next week. We need a performer for the opening." "You in?" He froze. "A concert? On that stage? In front of people again?" "I don't know if I can," he said honestly. "Think about it," the manager said. "It might change things for you and for your daughter." That last part hit him hard. For his daughter. That night he sat at home staring at the broken keyboard in the corner. His daughter was sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing something on a piece of paper. When she looked up, she noticed how quiet he was. "What's wrong?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "They want me to play on stage next week." Her eyes widened. "Really? That's amazing." "I'm scared," he admitted. "It's been so long. I don't know if I can do it anymore." She put her drawing aside and crawled over to hug him. "You can," she said softly. "Because when you play, it's not just music. It's love, and people feel that." He looked at her and felt something shift inside him. Maybe she was right. Maybe music wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about sharing a piece of yourself, even if it hurt a little. For the rest of the week, he practiced every night after she went to sleep. He would close the curtains, sit at the old keyboard, and try to remember the songs he once knew. His fingers were slower now, a little stiff, but the feeling was still there. He played until his eyes grew heavy, sometimes until the first light of dawn. The night before the concert, he stood in the empty theater once again, staring at the piano on the stage. The same piano he used to clean every night, the same one that now waited for him to sit and play. He touched the keys one last time before leaving, whispering to himself, "Tomorrow I'll try." When he got home, his daughter had left a small note on the table. It was written in her uneven handwriting, "You're going to make everyone proud. Just play like you do for me." He folded the note carefully and kept it in his pocket. He knew he would need it the next day when the lights were on him and the world was watching. As he lay in bed that night, he didn't feel fear anymore, just a quiet kind of peace. For the first time in years, he wasn't just a man cleaning the stage. He was a father, a dreamer, and a musician about to take back the part of himself he thought was gone forever. And somewhere deep down, he could almost hear the faint sound of applause waiting for him. Morning came quietly. The city outside was already alive, but inside his small apartment everything felt still. The man stood by the window, holding the little note his daughter had written for him the night before. The sunlight touched the edges of the paper and he smiled faintly as he read the uneven words again. "Just play like you do for me." He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket. That simple message was all he needed. Today wasn't just another day of cleaning floors or sweeping stages. Today, he was going to do something he hadn't done in years. His daughter followed him to the door, holding his hand tightly. "Are you nervous?" she asked with a grin. He nodded. "A little." "You'll do great," she said confidently. "I'll be there watching." Her faith in him was like a light in the dark. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Then I'll play for you," he whispered. At the theater, the staff were already setting up for the charity concert. There were banners hanging from the walls, people testing microphones, and camera crews adjusting their lights. The man arrived early, carrying his usual cleaning bag. It felt strange. He was used to walking in as the janitor, not as someone expected on stage. A few coworkers smiled and wished him luck. Others looked at him in disbelief, like they couldn't quite imagine the quiet custodian sitting under the spotlight. One of the organizers spotted him and came over. "Glad you're here," she said kindly. "You'll be performing after the opening speech. Just a short piece. Don't worry, take your time." He nodded, though his heart was already racing. As the audience began to fill the seats, he peeked out from behind the curtain. Rows and rows of people, parents, students, teachers, even some local musicians. The same seats he used to clean every night were now occupied by faces waiting for a show, and among them, near the front, he spotted his daughter. She was waving excitedly, holding a small handmade sign that said, "Go Dad." That made him smile, even as his stomach twisted with nerves. When the lights dimmed and the announcer spoke into the microphone, the crowd grew quiet. The charity event began with speeches, a short dance, and a few musical performances. Each one was greeted with polite applause. Backstage, he stood beside the piano, listening to the muffled sounds of music and clapping. His palms were sweaty. His breath felt uneven. He kept telling himself, "You're not doing this for fame. You're doing it for her." Finally, he heard the host's voice echo across the hall. "And now, for a very special performance. Please welcome someone who works behind the scenes in this very theater. Many of you might recognize him, but not for what you're about to hear. Give a warm welcome to our custodian, who will perform a piano piece for us tonight. For a few seconds, there was confusion. People looked around, whispering to each other. A janitor? Playing piano? Then he stepped out. He could feel the lights on his face, brighter than he remembered. The murmur in the crowd faded as he walked toward the piano. His shoes made soft sounds on the polished floor. His heart beat like a drum in his chest. He sat down slowly, taking a deep breath. For a moment, he just looked at the keys. The same keys he had polished every night for years. The same instrument he had admired from afar. He closed his eyes and placed his hands on the piano. The hall was silent. The first note rang out, gentle but sure. Then another and another. The melody began softly, like a whisper. It was a song he had written long ago, back when life was full of hope. But as he played, the music changed, growing deeper, fuller, more emotional. Every note carried a memory. Every chord told a story. The pain, the struggle, the love for his daughter, it all poured out through his fingers. The audience, who had expected a clumsy attempt, sat frozen. There was no sound but the piano. Even the smallest movement in the crowd seemed to stop. The melody rose, filled with heartbreak and beauty at the same time. His hands moved faster, confident now, alive again. He wasn't thinking anymore. He wasn't even aware of the people watching. He was somewhere else, inside the music, inside the years he'd lost, reliving everything that had brought him here. In the front row, his daughter watched with tears in her eyes. She had never seen him like this. She had always known her father was special, but now the whole world was seeing it too. The piece reached its final notes, slow, emotional, fading like a whisper. His hands rested on the keys for a moment before he looked up. The hall was so quiet he could hear the faint hum of the stage lights. And then, applause. It started softly, then grew louder, and louder still. People stood from their seats clapping, cheering, some even wiping their eyes. The sound filled the room, echoing through the walls. The man sat frozen, overwhelmed. He hadn't expected this. He looked toward his daughter. She was standing on her chair, clapping as hard as she could, her face shining with pride. He smiled, his eyes glistening. For a moment, everything felt unreal. When he finally stood up and bowed, the crowd roared again. Some shouted, "Encore!" Others took videos, wanting to capture the moment. Backstage, people rushed to congratulate him. Musicians shook his hand. One of the organizers hugged him and said, "You moved everyone out there, that was incredible." He didn't know what to say. He just kept smiling shyly, still trying to process it all. Later that night, after the crowd had left and the theater was quiet again, he stayed behind to help clean up. It felt strange. He had just performed in front of hundreds of people, yet here he was holding a mop again. But he didn't mind. It was who he was. As he worked, he heard footsteps. The manager walked in, hands in his pockets, looking thoughtful. "That was one of the best performances we've ever had here," he said. The man smiled. "Thank you, sir." "You could have been a star, you know," the manager added. "What happened?" He shrugged. "Life happened." The manager nodded slowly. Maybe it's time life gave something back. He didn't understand what that meant until the next day. When he arrived at work the following morning, people were already waiting for him outside. Some had seen the performance live, others had watched the video that had been uploaded online overnight. It had gone viral again, only this time it reached even more people. News channels had shared it. Comments poured in from all over the world. People called him the janitor pianist who played from the heart. Reporters wanted to interview him. A local music academy reached out, offering to let him teach part-time. Even a famous pianist had shared the video, writing, "Talent can live in the quietest corners." But what mattered most to him wasn't the fame. It was his daughter's smile when she saw the video. Everyone loves you, Dad, she said proudly. I told you they would. He laughed, pulling her close. No, they love the music, he said softly. That's what they really heard. That evening, as the sun began to set, they went for a walk by the river. The city lights shimmered on the water. She skipped ahead, humming the tune he had played at the concert. He watched her, realizing that for the first time in years, his heart didn't feel heavy anymore. She turned back to him and asked, "Will you play again?" He smiled. "Yes, I think I will." When they returned home, he sat at the small keyboard in the corner. This time the broken keys didn't bother him. He played softly while his daughter drew pictures beside him. The music filled the room again. Not perfect, not fancy, but real. He thought about everything that had happened, the years of silence, the pain, the doubts, and how a single moment had brought him back to who he truly was. He didn't know what the future held. Maybe he would perform again. Maybe he would teach. Maybe he would just play at home for his daughter. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he had found his way back to the music he had lost, and with it, the part of himself he thought was gone forever. That night, before bed, his daughter left a new note on his table. It said, "You're not just my dad. You're my hero." He read it, smiled, and whispered a quiet promise to himself. He would never let his music go silent again. Days turned into weeks, but the wave of attention didn't stop. The video of his piano performance continued to spread everywhere, on phones, TV shows, even international news pages. People were amazed by the story of a single father who had once cleaned the stage and then, with a single performance, made an entire audience cry. At first, he didn't know how to handle it. Reporters showed up at the theater wanting interviews. Music teachers sent letters asking if he would like to collaborate. Even the local mayor invited him to perform at a charity gala. For a man who used to walk home quietly after work, this new life felt like a dream he wasn't prepared for. But he still went to work every morning just like before. He still wore his janitor's uniform, carried his mop and broom, and greeted everyone with a polite smile. Some of his coworkers couldn't understand why he kept doing it. "You don't need to be cleaning anymore," one of them told him. "You're famous now. You could be teaching or performing." He smiled and said simply, "Fame doesn't pay rent right away. Besides, this job kept me alive when nothing else could." The truth was he wasn't doing it for money anymore. Cleaning the stage had become part of who he was. It reminded him of the journey he took to get here, the nights of silence, the tears, and the patience that life had taught him. Still, his life had changed in quiet ways. People treated him differently now. The same people who once walked past him without noticing were now stopping to talk. The theater owner asked him to help tune the piano, something that used to be another man's duty. Musicians who had performed on that same stage came to shake his hand. They told him his story gave them hope, but not everyone was kind. A few people whispered that it was just luck. Others said it was a stunt for attention. One evening, he overheard two young performers talking behind the curtain. "I don't get it," one said. "He's not that good. It's just a sad story that makes people emotional." The other replied, "Yeah, if I had his story, I'd go viral too." The man pretended not to hear, but their words stung. That night, he stayed after everyone left and sat at the piano alone. His hands trembled slightly as he played. The melody sounded different, heavier, uncertain. He wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe people only cared because they felt sorry for him. But then he remembered his daughter's face in the audience, her small hands clapping with pride. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "I don't play for them," he whispered to himself. "I play for her." That thought gave him peace again. A few days later, he received a call that would change everything once more. It was from a well-known music school in the city. The director had seen his video and wanted to meet him. "We believe your story and your passion could inspire our students," the voice on the phone said. "Would you be interested in visiting our academy?" He hesitated. The idea of stepping into a music school again after so many years scared him. But his daughter encouraged him to go. "You always tell me to be brave," she said. "Now it's your turn." So he agreed. The day he visited the academy, he wore his best clothes, a clean shirt and the same old shoes he always wore. The building was large, full of young students practicing in rooms that echoed with sound. Piano notes, violin strings, and laughter filled the hallways. It reminded him of his own youth, back when he was a student dreaming of concerts and big stages. The director welcomed him warmly and gave him a tour. "We'd love for you to teach a workshop here," the director said. "Not just about piano, but about life, perseverance, and heart." He was surprised. "I'm not a teacher," he said quietly. The director smiled. "You don't have to be one on paper. You already are by example." He accepted the offer, though he wasn't sure what he would say. The next week, he stood in front of a room full of young musicians, all staring at him curiously. Some had seen his video. Others didn't know what to expect. He started nervously, telling them how he had once been where they were, full of dreams, full of plans. Then he spoke about how life doesn't always follow the notes we write for it. "When everything falls apart," he said softly, "you'll think your music is gone too, but it's not. It waits. It waits for you to come back." The students were silent. Then one of them asked, "Didn't it hurt to lose everything?" He smiled faintly. "It did. But sometimes pain teaches you to play differently. It makes your music honest." When he sat down at the piano and played for them, the room fell quiet again, just like it had that night in the theater. The students didn't just hear his music, they felt it. Afterward, many of them came to thank him. Some cried. One said, "You made me want to play again." When he returned home that evening, his daughter was waiting with dinner on the table. She listened eagerly as he told her about the academy, the students, and the way they listened. "That's amazing, Dad," she said proudly. "You're teaching now." He chuckled. "Maybe just sharing a few things," he said. But it felt good. Life slowly began to change. He was still working part-time at the theater, but he was also giving small lessons at the academy twice a week. His schedule was full, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He was doing something meaningful, not just surviving, but living again. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at his apartment. It was from a famous concert organization overseas. They had seen his video and wanted to invite him to perform at an international event dedicated to unsung heroes of music. The letter ended with the words, "We believe your story will touch the world." He read it twice, not believing it was real. His daughter jumped with joy. "You have to go," she said, grabbing his hand, but he wasn't sure. Traveling meant leaving her for a few days. It also meant standing on a much bigger stage than ever before. "I don't know if I'm ready," he murmured. She looked at him seriously. "You always tell me to chase my dreams. Now it's your turn again." That night he sat by the window thinking about everything, his past, the struggles, the music, the second chances. He realized that maybe, just maybe, this was life giving him back what it once took away. So he said yes. In the days leading up to the trip, he practiced constantly. The theater manager even gave him time off, saying, "Go make us proud." The other staff cheered for him, the same people who had once only known him as the quiet janitor with a mop. On the day of his flight, he carried only a small bag and the folded notes his daughter had written him. At the airport, she hugged him tightly. "Play like you do for me," she said again, repeating the same words that had started everything. He promised he would. As the plane lifted off the ground, he looked out the window and smiled. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of what was coming. He was ready to face it, with his music, with his story, and with the quiet strength that life had taught him. Far below, the city lights faded into tiny dots, but in his heart, a brighter light was burning. He didn't know what waited for him at the international concert, or how people there would react to a man who once cleaned stages for a living. But he knew one thing for sure. He was going to walk onto that stage, not as a janitor, not as a viral story, but as a father, a survivor, and a man whose music had finally found its way back home. And somewhere deep inside, he felt the soft rhythm of his daughter's heartbeat, reminding him that no matter where he went, his real song would always begin and end with her. The day of the flight felt unreal. The man who used to mop the floors of a theater was now holding a ticket, with his name printed under the words "Guest Performer." He had never been on a plane before. As he sat by the window watching the clouds drift past, he felt both nervous and grateful. His heart pounded with excitement, but his thoughts kept returning to home, his little girl waving from the gate, her smile brighter than anything he had ever seen. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small folded notes she had given him before he left. Each one had a simple message written in her uneven handwriting. Play with your heart, Dad. Don't be afraid. I'll be watching you from here. Those words became his comfort during the long flight. When he arrived, the city felt enormous and unfamiliar. The buildings were taller, the lights brighter, and everyone seemed to be moving in a hurry. A representative from the concert organization met him at the airport, holding a sign with his name. "Welcome," the man said warmly. "We've been waiting for you." The whole world loved your story. He didn't know how to respond. It felt strange to be treated like someone important. Just a few months ago, he was cleaning spilled coffee and sweeping confetti after shows. Now people wanted to shake his hand and take pictures with him. At the hotel, he was shown to a room bigger than his entire apartment back home. There was a piano in the corner, polished and perfect. He sat down in front of it, running his fingers gently over the keys. It had been years since he had touched such a fine instrument. For a moment, he just sat there listening to the silence. Then he began to play softly, a slow, gentle tune that sounded like a whisper from home. He didn't realize the hotel staff had stopped outside the door to listen. One of them quietly filmed a short clip and shared it online. By the next morning, it had thousands of views. Comments flooded in from all over the world, people saying they couldn't wait to hear him perform live. But with every word of praise, his fear grew stronger. What if he failed? What if people only came to see a story, not music? He had never performed in front of such a large audience before. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, looking at the foreign skyline, missing the familiar smell of home-cooked food and the sound of his daughter humming as she drew pictures. The next morning, he visited the concert hall for rehearsal. The building was breathtaking, massive chandeliers, velvet seats, and a grand stage that seemed endless. As he walked across it, he felt a lump in his throat. He remembered sweeping a stage just like this not long ago. A coordinator introduced him to the other performers, classically trained musicians from different countries. They were polite, but he could sense their curiosity. Some looked at him with respect. Others seemed doubtful. One young pianist, confident and proud, whispered to another, "He's just a janitor who got lucky." He heard it but didn't react. He simply smiled and said, "Maybe. But sometimes luck is just another word for grace." During the sound check, his hands trembled. He made a few mistakes and his nerves got the better of him. The coordinator gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Take your time," she said softly. "You don't have to prove anything. Just play from your heart." That night, back in his hotel room, he stared at the piano again. His fingers rested on the keys, but he didn't play. Instead, he whispered to himself, "Why did they choose me?" Then he remembered his daughter's words again. "Play like you do for me." He closed his eyes and began to play the melody he had written for her years ago, a tune full of tenderness and hope. Every note told a part of his story, the loss, the struggle, the small joys, and the love that never gave up. When he finished, he finally smiled. He knew what he would play the next day. The morning of the performance arrived. The air buzzed with energy. The concert was being broadcast live across several countries, and the audience was filled with musicians, critics, and celebrities. The man stood backstage, dressed in a simple suit provided by the organizers. He didn't have fancy cufflinks or polished shoes, but he carried something no one else had, a heart full of truth. When his name was announced, he walked onto the stage to polite applause. The hall was enormous and the lights were bright, almost blinding. For a moment he froze. Then, in the crowd, he spotted something that made his breath catch. In the front row sat a small figure holding a handmade sign that said, "Go, Dad." His daughter. The organizers had secretly flown her in as a surprise. Tears filled his eyes. He took a deep breath and sat at the piano. The audience grew silent. Cameras focused on him. The world waited. The first few notes floated softly through the hall. Then his hands began to move faster, more confident, as if the keys were guiding him instead of the other way around. The melody grew deeper, filled with emotion. It spoke of quiet nights, hidden dreams, and love that never fades. Every person in that hall felt it. The young musicians who once doubted him stared in awe. The critics put down their pens. Some people closed their eyes and let the music carry them away. Halfway through, a soft gasp came from the audience when they realized the melody was based on a lullaby, a father's song to his child. The man's daughter wiped her tears, whispering, "That's our song. By the time the final note faded, there was complete silence. It lasted for several seconds before the entire hall erupted in applause. People stood clapping and cheering. The ovation went on and on, echoing through the grand walls like thunder. He stood slowly, bowing his head, overwhelmed. His hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from emotion. He looked out at the crowd and then at his daughter. She was smiling so wide that his heart nearly burst. After the concert, journalists rushed to him, microphones flashing, cameras everywhere. One asked, "What made you play like that?" He answered simply, "I wasn't playing for the world. I was playing for someone who believed in me when no one else did." That single line spread faster than any headline. It was quoted in newspapers, shared across social media, and printed under his photo in magazines. People called him the father pianist, the man who reminded the world that greatness doesn't need fame, only faith and love. The organizers offered him future tours and collaborations, but he only accepted one request: a scholarship program for children who couldn't afford music lessons. "There are too many kids with songs inside them," he said. "They just need a piano to let them out." Before leaving the city, he visited the concert hall one last time. The stage was empty now. The lights dimmed. He walked to the piano, touched the keys once more, and whispered, "Thank you." Then he turned toward his daughter, who was waiting near the seats. "Ready to go home?" he asked. She nodded and said softly, "You did it, Dad." He smiled. "No," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We did it." As they stepped out of the hall, the cool night breeze brushed against their faces. The city lights glittered around them, but nothing shone brighter than the joy in their eyes. Back home, things didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still bills, still work, still ordinary days, but something inside him had changed. He no longer felt invisible. He no longer felt like life had passed him by. He had found his purpose again, not through fame, but through the music that came from love, pain, and hope. Every evening, he still sat by the piano in their small apartment, his daughter by his side. Sometimes she played a few notes and he guided her gently. Sometimes they just listened. The sound of the keys filled their home, soft and steady, a reminder that dreams might bend, but they never truly break. And whenever people asked him about his incredible journey, he always smiled and said, "I was just cleaning the stage when life gave me one more chance to play." When he returned home, the city looked the same, but everything felt different. The streets, the theater, the park near his small apartment, they all held new meaning. It wasn't because he had become famous or because people now recognized him. It was because he had finally found peace within himself. The first morning back, he walked his daughter to school. Parents who once barely noticed him now greeted him warmly. Some even stopped to thank him. One man said, "Your story made me pick up the guitar again after 20 years." Another woman told him, "I showed your video to my son. He's learning piano now." He smiled politely at them, but deep down he still felt like the same man who once swept the stage late at night. The attention was nice, but it wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that he had played again, not for fame, not for recognition, but for the love that had carried him through every dark day. At the theater, everyone treated him differently now. The staff who used to call him cleaner now called him sir. The manager even offered him a part-time job helping with music rehearsals. But he still asked to clean sometimes. "It keeps me grounded," he said with a smile. One evening, he stayed after everyone left and sat at the piano on that same stage where everything had begun. The lights were dim and the seats were empty. He ran his hand along the piano keys, remembering that first moment, when the crowd laughed as he sat down expecting nothing. He smiled quietly and whispered, "Thank you for that night." As he played softly in the empty hall, the sound echoed beautifully. He wasn't performing anymore. He was simply talking to the piano, to life itself. After a few weeks, he received a call from the concert organizers again. They wanted to know if he would accept invitations to tour other countries. He thought about it carefully. He loved performing, but he also wanted to be with his daughter. He didn't want her to grow up without him around, so instead of saying yes, he asked, "Can we do something else instead? Something for children who can't afford to learn music?" The organizers were touched. Together, they started a small program called Keys of Hope. It offered free piano lessons to children from poor families. The man volunteered to teach them himself. He said, "Music saved me. Maybe it can save someone else too." The first class began in the same theater where he once worked as a janitor. 10 children came that day, shy and excited. Some had never touched a piano before. Their eyes lit up as they pressed the keys and heard the sound for the first time. He taught them not just how to play notes, but how to feel them. Every sound has a story, he told them. Play yours. Over time, the class grew. Soon there were dozens of children coming every week. Some parents even helped clean the hall after lessons, saying it reminded them of where his journey began. He loved teaching. Every time a child smiled after playing their first song, he saw a little piece of himself in them, that same spark he thought he had lost long ago. One afternoon, while the children practiced, a small boy hesitated at the piano. "I can't do it," the boy whispered, frustrated. The man sat beside him and said gently, "You know, I once stopped playing too, for many years. But music waited for me. It'll wait for you too. Just don't give up." The boy nodded, took a deep breath, and tried again. This time he played the whole melody without stopping. The man clapped softly, his eyes full of pride. Word about the program spread quickly. Local newspapers wrote about it, and donations began to pour in. The theater offered to dedicate one of its smaller rooms as a permanent music classroom. It was painted in warm colors with photos of the children and one large picture of him and his daughter at the piano. Every weekend, he and his daughter would walk to the market, buy flowers, and place them in the classroom. "For Mom," his daughter would whisper quietly. It had become their ritual, their way of keeping love alive. One evening, as the sun set, the man received a letter from a boy who had taken his lessons. It read, "Thank you for showing me that dreams are not about being the best, but about being true to yourself. You taught me more than music. You taught me hope." He folded the letter and placed it next to his daughter's notes, the ones she had written before his first flight. They had become his most precious treasures. Months passed, and the program grew into something beautiful. The children performed small concerts, and the community came together like never before. The same theater that once echoed with laughter at a janitor sitting at the piano, now filled with applause for children who played their hearts out. One winter night, as snow began to fall outside, the theater hosted a special evening called Music of Second Chances. The man was asked to perform again, this time alongside his students. He stood on stage, surrounded by the young musicians he had taught, and smiled proudly. Before starting, he spoke softly into the microphone. "Once I used to clean this stage. I thought my story had ended there. But life had other plans. Tonight I don't stand here alone. I stand with every dream that was almost forgotten. Thank you for believing in me." Then he began to play, joined by the children. The sound was simple but full of warmth. The audience didn't just hear music. They heard stories of struggle, hope, and love woven into every note. When the concert ended, the crowd rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Tears glistened in many eyes. His daughter ran onto the stage and hugged him tightly. "You did it again," she whispered. He looked at her with a gentle smile and said, "No, we did it again." That night, after everyone left, he stayed behind for a while, walking across the empty stage. The lights were low and the air felt peaceful. He looked out into the empty seats and whispered, "It's funny how life works. Sometimes you think you've lost everything, but that's when it begins to build you back up." As he turned off the lights and walked toward the door, he heard his daughter's voice from the hallway. "Dad, are you coming?" He smiled, taking one last glance at the piano. "Yes," he said softly. "I'm coming." Outside, snowflakes drifted gently under the streetlights. He took her hand and they walked home together, leaving footprints in the white snow. Years later, people would still talk about him. The janitor who silenced a theater with one song, the father who turned heartbreak into music. But for him, the real story was never about fame or applause. It was about love, endurance, and finding beauty in the smallest moments. He spent the rest of his life teaching children how to play, but more importantly, how to listen to life, to themselves, to the people they loved. He often told his students, "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being real." Every time he sat at the piano, he felt thankful for the hard days that shaped him, for the daughter who believed in him, and for the second chance that came when he least expected it. And even after many years, every time the lights in the theater dimmed and the piano waited in silence, The story of the single dad who once cleaned the stage continued to inspire everyone who heard it, because his song, full of love, pain, and hope, never truly ended. It lived on, in every child who learned to play, in every listener who believed again, and in every dream that dared to begin, late but strong. The world had once laughed when he sat at the piano, but in the end it stood to applaud, not just his music but the man he had become.